Scenes of disaster, all from just the last month. From North America to Germany to China, these are the extreme weather conditions that the science told us to expect. But in a paper shared exclusively with this program, some of the world's top climate experts say the pace is faster than ever predicted and is being partly driven by what's happening many miles away on top of the world.
It's becoming more and more clear in the scientific community that what we have seen cannot just be up to 1.2 degrees of global warming. Much more, it has to be connected to the melting and the warming that we see in the Arctic.
It's called Arctic amplification. On current trajectories, it looks as if the Arctic will be summer ice-free sometime in the next 10, 15, 20 years, maybe 5 years.
I believe what is happening is that the world weather systems are in transition now. And this transition at the moment is heavily driven by what's happening in the Arctic Circle region.
The Arctic is warming much faster than the rise in global average temperatures. Over the last 30 years, the Arctic has warmed at a rate of 0.81 degrees Celsius per decade, more than 3 times faster than the global average.
There are now already cities that we have to start saying will not be livable in just 30 years' time.
The newly formed Climate Crisis Advisory Group say ice melting will not just lead to sea level rise, but contribute to the record-breaking heat and rainfall in parts of the Northern Hemisphere. What happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic.
As the ice is melting in the Arctic Ocean is becoming fresher. And if that fresh water makes its way into the North Atlantic, it can disrupt the ocean circulations, which would again have a knock-on effect throughout the whole of the Northern Hemisphere.
But we also expose the permafrost, and this is permanently frozen ground underneath the Arctic ice. And this releases methane.
Those are hundreds to 300 times more potent than CO2 emissions. And once you cross that point, then really there is, a huge threat to civilization.
These lush forests in Finland are on the edge of the Arctic Circle. This spring, temperatures shot up from -30 degrees to +31, a 61-degree change in a matter of just 6 weeks. In the town of Selki, near the border with Russia, lives Tero Mustonen, a lead author for the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Forest fires have become the symbol all across the northern regions, including the boreal, and now increasingly so into the tundra, of how extreme weather events are affecting the north.
The intensity and scale of heat here has never been seen before. A record was broken this spring of 27 days of temperature above 25 degrees.
We are starting to witness the fact that increased tundra fires and forest fires are causing the melt events on permafrost and further adding methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
Even further north in Finnish Lapland, the indigenous Sami community is having their way of life disrupted by the warming of the habitat. Cold water dependent fish such as Arctic char, which are essential to food security for the Sami people, might be facing regional extinction.
Urgent actions are needed, especially Arctic char is really suffering these Celsius degrees, and we don't even know whether or not such species or types of Arctic char have already been extinct during these last couple of extremely warm summers.
With changes in this region risking catastrophe for all of us, some now argue that cutting carbon emissions is no longer enough. Radical ideas like refreezing the Arctic are being considered in the report released tomorrow. One technology known as cloud brightening would involve pumping tiny droplets of seawater into the air. The low white clouds that form, full of tiny salt crystals, would reflect away the warming rays of the sun and stop the surface from getting too hot.
Looking at those technologies is really mainly looking at buying more time. So how can I buy the country and how can I buy the planet another 30 years of odd time in order to allow the implementation of important, deep and rapid emission cuts?
Of course, none of these technologies would stop the need to reduce emissions, and caution is urged by those near the communities where this type of technology, often called geoengineering, would be used.
The geoengineering question it's a human rights question, it's an ethical question. What will the indigenous peoples that will be impacted? This should be our utmost last effort. And before that, we should have exhausted all possible other means.
The question is, how much time do we have before all other possible means are exhausted? As weather events become more extreme and existential, the window to stop the warming of the Arctic, and indeed the planet, is closing. Well, joining us now from Cambridge is the chair of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group, former Chief Scientific Advisor and then the UK Special Representative for Climate Change until 2017, Sir David King. Sir David, is refreezing the Arctic really possible, or is it a fairy tale at the moment? And if it's a fairy tale, isn't it quite irresponsible to put it out there?
Well, Krishnan, I don't believe it is a fairy tale, but let me just say, I don't know what the alternative is. We're saying we have to reduce emissions far more rapidly than we are today. We have to leave fossil fuels in the ground. We have to remove the excess greenhouse gases that we have already put into the atmosphere that are creating this crisis today and into the future. And then to buy time while we manage that process, or those two processes, we will also need to refreeze the Arctic. Now, I don't think it's ridiculous. We have at least half a dozen different processes that we're looking at, and we prefer to look at processes that mimic the natural world process. And what you've just seen there is the marine cloud brightening technique that we're working with, and Stephen Salter up in the University of Edinburgh is the marine engineer who's most advanced on this technology. I do believe it's doable, but I have to say to you that without this, what are we going to do? Because we simply don't have the time we need to reduce emissions. And at the moment, we're talking about mid-century. Let's hope we can do it much more quickly than that. And to bring greenhouse gas levels down to something like the pre-industrial level, that's going to take us to the end of the century. We need that critical time. Buying time becomes essential.
So are you and this new group of scientists that you're chairing saying effectively that the goals of COP26, which are still, they say, to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, I mean, that we've missed that already? It's just not going to happen.
Right. So today, Krishnan, we're at 1.2 degrees or 1.25 degrees above the pre-industrial level. We're heading rapidly towards that 1.5. But even at 1.25, where we are today, we're saying it looks as if the Arctic Circle region has passed its tipping point. That means the ice will continue to be lost. And what we haven't discussed on this program yet is the consequences of that for sea level rise. As the ice on the sea melts, that's not going to cause additional sea level rise. But the ice on Greenland, which is now sitting in that blue Arctic Sea during the polar summer, that ice is being lost more and more rapidly over every 5 years that goes past. And as all the ice on Greenland melts, global sea levels will rise by enormous amounts. And what we're saying is, unless we actually step in and do these things, we're going to see sea levels rise such that countries like Vietnam will be 95% under seawater in just 30 years' time. So we're looking at potential disasters around the world, which will create a new class of climate migrants looking for somewhere else to live. And this just in Southeast Asia may amount to 200 million plus people looking for somewhere else to live.
And is your advisory group there because, rather as you did with Independent Sage on COVID, you feel that the official scientists aren't really telling it as it is?
No, that's not what I'm saying. We have set up a group that is agile. We will produce a report every month into the future, and we have public meetings every month. We're putting everything that we determine, and this report, as you've seen, Krishnan, is very detailed. We're putting every bit of information we gather into the public domain. These aren't just 15 experts. These are, I believe, 15 world-leading experts, many of them, for example, involved in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. So it's not as if we're criticizing them. We're simply giving an ability to do an agile response. And that's why what we're talking about now is the extreme weather events that are being experienced this summer, that are being experienced right now. The floods in Germany, as your report has just expanded on, are happening right now. And we're giving a causal explanation and then what needs to be done.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.